Good morning, Pastor Will here, June 28th, 2020. Today's message is out of Acts 21, the first 7 verses. This is Paul, when we had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Kos and the next day to Rhodes and from there to Patara. When we found a ship bound for Phoenicia, we went on board and set sail. We came in sight of Cyprus, and leaving it on our left, we sailed to Syria and landed because the ship was to unload its cargo there. We looked at the disciples and stayed there for 7 days. Through the Spirit, those disciples told Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. When our days there were ended, we left and proceeded on our journey, and all of them, with wives and children, escorted us outside the city. There we knelt down on the beach and prayed and said farewell to one another. Then we went on board the ship and they returned home. May God bless this reading and this interpretation of the Word. Some years ago, Jennifer and I went on a cruise around the Caribbean. We had a great trip. There were several ports of call, but one of the ports of call that I was most looking forward to was in Cozumel. I had been to Cozumel some years before, and while there, found a fantastic sterling silver punch bowl unlike any I've ever seen before. This punch bowl was in the shape of an adult armadillo on its back. Its paws were up like that, or its feet, claws were up like that, and the belly of the beast was where the punch was served out of that. And then the armadillo's tail curved around the edge of the top of the punch bowl, and then hanging on this tail by their own tails, the tails were the handles, with little cups, sterling silver cups of baby armadillos, and then their little tails would hang on, I guess, the mama or the daddy armadillo's punch bowl tail. It sounds quite hideous the way I've described it. Remember, though, it was all in silver, and it was beautiful. It was quite striking. And in my mind, as I looked at it, I could imagine the horror of guests that I could serve punch out of that bowl, And I was just imagining having parties and inviting people over just for the excuse to use this punch bowl and to see the looks on their faces when I use this bowl. This bowl would replace my Marty Moose punch bowl, I'm sure, my Marty Moose cups from Christmas Vacation. The salesperson, unfortunately, as much as I wanted this sterling silver punch bowl, it was very expensive and I could not justify buying it. It was several $1,000s. And the salesperson noticed I kept lingering about and tried to engage me in conversation and try to sell me this punch bowl. And so we began haggling. And to my surprise, we eventually got to a price that I could live with. I could afford that punch bowl. But I still hesitated on buying it. And I told the salesperson, let me think about it and I'll come back in the evening if I'm going to buy it. And so I left. I ended up not going back, and I ended up not buying that sterling silver armadillo punch bowl complete with baby sterling silver armadillo punch bowl cups. I told myself I didn't really need it. How likely was I to have parties? Not very likely. I told myself I could use it to brush my teeth or use it for all number of other things. Just have it on the table and use it to serve whatever we were drinking. But I knew that this probably wasn't likely, and so I just talked myself out of it. But the thing is, after I got back home, I regretted that I did not buy that sterling silver armadillo punch bowl. I thought about it long after I had returned home. In fact, I thought about it for years. You would think such a thing would be easy to find on the internet, but I've never seen anything like it online, and I've searched for it many, many, many times. So when Jennifer and I decided to go on a cruise, I said, now's the chance, going back to Cozumel. As it happened, our ship got caught in a storm. It was quite the storm with gale force winds. I remember going up on the top deck of the storm to experience the gale force winds. This is before I had lived in Minnesota and had gone to Lake Superior during the gales of November, despite being warned not to, and experience the gales there. And it was fascinating to be on the top deck of the ship and to lean backward, and the wind was blowing so hard that it held me up. It was pretty cool. But what was uncool was that the captain decided not to dock in Cozumel because he thought it was not safe for the ship and the passengers, I guess, and the crew to attempt to dock there. And so, to my dismay, we sailed right by Cozumel, didn't stop. So I had lost another chance at the Armadillo Punch Bowl. Later in that same cruise, though, Jennifer and I called on a port in Jamaica. And while we were there, we hired a driver to take us beyond the touristy areas of the first couple of blocks and to take us up into the mountains where the real Jamaicans live. That's what we wanted to see, the real Jamaicans. After a very short while with this guy, we realized that even though it may not have looked like a touristy area, we were still in a touristy area. And apparently this driver was taking us to friends of his and trying to help them either make a living or add to their living or whatever it is. I don't know. I didn't mind it. It was still fun. And I actually respected the guy for looking after his friends. As we were up in the mountains, we saw a guy who swallowed fire and swords if we'd give him a tip. We saw a woman who sold fruit. Several people were selling fruit, kinds of fruit I'd never seen before. There were many people on these very tall stilts. These stilts were like 10 feet tall, and the people were dressed with the leaves and foliage of the jungle. So they looked like walking trees or like something off of Predator, that movie Predator, if you remember it, with Jesse Ventura and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Who would have known, who would have guessed at that time both of those guys would have gone on to be governors of different states? Anyway, it was quite impressive seeing these people on these stilts, and then you could take a picture of them for $1 and things, those kind of things. Now, one of the things I do when I go away, what I usually do is I like to keep a good bit of cash on me, so if there's opportunity to help someone, I have a variety of cash, 5s, 1s, 10s, 20s, whatever, 50s. But this time I wasn't prepared, and all I had on me were 20s and 100s. I didn't have any lower denominations of bills. And this kind of worried me because I knew I was limited in what I could do, what I could give. But anyway, we were looking at people or interacting with people or sharing with people, or we were crazy tourists in the backwoods of Jamaica helping people make a living. Before heading out on the cruise, we had asked our sons if there was anything they would like us to bring them. And most of our sons gave the typical answer, a t-shirt, just get us a t-shirt, except for one of them. One of them said that he wanted some maracas. Maracas. What was the likelihood I was going to be able to find any maracas on a cruise? I suspected he was just being a smart aleck, but I determined I was going to keep my eye out for some maracas. As we were driven around the backcountry mountains of Jamaica, the driver stopped beside a couple of women who were walking on the road. One of the women appeared to be in her 20s. She was dressed in contemporary clothing, sandals, shorts, shirt, and she had a variety of jewelry on her, and she was selling the jewelry to passersby. Apparently a lot of tourists were driven up around in these areas. And there was an older woman with her. Now this woman appeared to be older than God, and she was wearing a dark robe that covered her entire body except for her face and her hands. But she could pull her hands up into the sleeves of the robe and you couldn't see them. All you could see was her face, and she looked incredibly old. You know, who knows? Maybe she had a really hard life and she was only 20. I don't know. But she looked ancient. And so then the young woman was showing us her wares. This is what I have, a necklace here or that. And the older woman was just standing there. And so trying to be polite, I looked at her and I said, well, what about you, ma'am? Do you have anything to sell? And at this point, like a magician or a Jedi Knight, she whipped out her hands and hidden up in that robe sleeves, she whipped out her hands and she went, maracas. I couldn't believe it. But they weren't cheap plastic maracas like you get from Party City. They were quite ornate and nice, and they looked handmade. They were just some nice maracas. And I thought, what luck? What was the likelihood? But I also thought, in a fraction of a second, I was thinking, wow, maracas, I'm going to buy them no matter what they cost, no matter what, just so I can bring them back to Austin and go, here's your dang maracas. But I wondered, does she have any change? If I give her a 20, does she have change to give me back? If I give her 100, does she have change? How much are these maracas going to be? And so I just asked her, well, those are some nice maracas. How much are they? And she very quietly and timidly said, $10. And in that moment, I recognized an opportunity. Because remember, all I had was hundreds and twenties. An opportunity. And so I said, $10? Surely you mean $10 a piece, right? She hesitated just a second, and then she said, yes, $10 a piece. So I gave her 20. She gave them the maracas. We parted ways. She was happy that by some foolish rich American tourist, and I was happy that I was hopefully able to help her a little bit with her income and also to get those maracas so I could take back home to Austin. The text for today is Acts 21, 1 through 7. I spoke from this text a few months ago. It's one of my favorite biblical texts because it shows how beautiful the church can be. Paul and his entourage are traveling when they stop for 7 days. While stopped, Paul looks up other followers of Jesus in the area. And Paul and his entourage and these other followers of Jesus spend the week together. They just spend the week together, enjoying one another. And during this time, these other followers, one of them or some of them receive a message from the Spirit of God to tell Paul that he should not return to Jerusalem because it's not going to be good for him. And they share that with Paul, and Paul makes up his mind what he's going to do. And they just spend the week together. And then in this scene, after they spend a week together, these disciples, all of them, Paul, his people, and all these new disciples, all of these disciples and their families, their wives and their children and their husbands, I'll say, they all walk down to the beach together to see Paul and his group off. And on the beach, they pray together and they say farewell, and then each goes on their journey. Paul and his crew get on the ship and continue on their journey, and all those families turn around and walk home on their journey of life. And in these few verses, we see how the church looks out for each other and how the church takes opportunity to care for one another when opportunity arises. And that's what the church is for. The church is supposed to love the world in Jesus' name, and we don't do it as individuals. We don't do it on our own. We do it together, and we take care of one another so that mission can be accomplished. And we love each other, and we look out for each other like the people who said, Paul, I don't think you're supposed to go to Jerusalem. It's not a good idea. They weren't pushy with Paul. They didn't make him do anything. They didn't hold his own decisions against him. Paul went and did what he wanted to do. But they told him what they thought because they loved him. The lesson I learned from not buying the sterling silver armadillo punch bowl the first chance I had when I went to Cozumel many, many years ago was that opportunity, to take opportunity when it presents itself. Do not put off for later when presented with a unique opportunity. When I was in Jamaica, I made an opportunity to hopefully help a poor woman, make just $10 more with dignity. And she helped me by providing me with maracas in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of a jungle. Who would have thought? A few months ago, I bought these maracas, a whole pack of them, and this thing, I don't know how it works. Let's see. Good grief. Well, it's supposed to come out like that, but I don't know how to do it. And a kazoo. Can't do that either. And a bunch of other toys and music makers. I bought these for a service I had planned in April. And I think the text was about entering the gates with Thanksgiving or entering the sanctuary with music making or that kind of thing. And I had planned on distributing all these little music making toys so that we could all parade into the sanctuary with much merriment and fun. And then COVID-19 hit, and we never had the opportunity. It never happened. So I've been sitting around these toys waiting, saying when when the COVID-19 pandemic becomes safer, we're all going to get together and we're going to enter into the sanctuary with much rejoicing. But today's my last Sunday with Big Creek. So that was a missed opportunity. So I've been playing these today, thinking about our times together, and thinking about the good times we had together, although it was a short time, and though the last half of our time together was not at all as we had anticipated. And I just wanted to take the moment, or the opportunity, if you will, to thank you for welcoming me so graciously and for welcoming Jennifer so graciously. Many of you were very kind to me and to Jennifer on this stop in our journey, and we count ourselves blessed to have had opportunity to get to know you, and we thank God for you. And I want to encourage you to welcome your new pastor with much grace as well, and extend that grace to one another. It's harder perhaps to extend grace to one another because you've all known each other so long, and so many of you are family, and it's harder sometimes when we know each other well. It's harder to open up sometimes and say what's really on our heart to each other. But take the opportunity before it's gone. Take the opportunity to share with one another what you mean to each other, and to do this with your words and notes and your attitudes and whatever it takes. Don't put off for later the opportunity that you have now to show each other in the church that you love them as God loves them. And also don't put off opportunity to share God's love with others in the community. Big Creek has a great opportunity to share God's love with others in the community. But we have a lot of excuses, or you have a lot of excuses not to. Don't listen to the excuses anymore. Listen to the love of God and the presence of God with you. And trust God's presence with you to strengthen you and give you the abilities you need to share that love with others. You might not get another chance. Paul's stop in Syria presented him and other Jesus followers with the opportunity to look out for one another, and even just a little bit, to encourage one another and make their lives better. You know, Paul recognized that he could have an opportunity when he stopped. He could have stayed to himself. He could have said, man, this traveling's tiring. I'm going to stay in the hotel all the time and get people to look after me and order room service. But he said, no, there's an opportunity here. And he made that opportunity, and he took it. And he got to meet together with the other people who are a part of the church. And the church is no different today. We're blessed with the opportunity of one another, to encourage one another, and to help make each other's lives just a little bit better. Some churches do a really poor job at encouraging one another. It's like there's some kind of competition. And oftentimes this competition comes about because one member or a group of members think that they are entitled to more than everybody else, or that they are to be served. Well, that's not the church. The church serves together. They serve one another, and they serve the world together. The church exists to make the world a better place. The church exists to encourage others just a little bit, to let them know that they are beloved, that their lives matter, that they are cared for, and that God cares for them. And the way that the world knows God cares for them is when the people who are the church care for them, even when it doesn't make any sense, even when it seems irrational, even when it doesn't seem like a good idea. The church recognizes in other people's lives an opportunity to share God's incredible love with them. And when we focus on God's leading and God's way, it's much easier for us to recognize opportunity. Now, if I hadn't been focusing on God when I saw those maracas in Jamaica, I could have thought, $10 is a good deal. I bet I can get them for $5. But instead, I think I saw through the eyes of God and saw a woman who needed to know that she matters. And $20, is nothing to communicate that. The gospel is very, very simple. Treat all of creation with respect by loving creation the way God loves us, unconditionally and irrationally. Take that with you, hold it dear, and share it even more dearly. I thank God for each of you, and I wish each of you well as you continue on your own life's journey. In the name of Christ, peace be with you. Amen.